Good morning, everybody. I will start a little slow as everybody connects to the audio for us this morning, but welcome to SKC Office Hours. I'm Sarah Krom, Managing Partner of SKC & Co. CPAs. As usual, just kicking off with a few housekeeping issues. We are recording this session. It will be sent out in a link to you, and it also will be posted in the resource section of our website. So if you want to share it with a colleague or revisit it yourself, you'll be able to do so. As with all of our sessions, we want this to be as interactive as possible and as meaningful as it can be for you. So please put any questions, comments, thoughts that you have in the chat. Brittany will help monitor that as we go through this presentation. We do have a few pre-submitted questions with the registration from today, so we'll get to those closer to the end of our presentation. If we can't answer any of the questions within the hour, we will send out the answers and responses in an email that we will circulate later with the video link. But on to the meat of this morning's topic, which is automation. So in our world where it seems that every headline covers AI or a new technological advancement, it's very easy for small business owners to be overwhelmed, to feel left out, or quite simply to just be confused. And there's as many solutions available for automation as there are business cases to implement them. So we're going to jump right in today. And I am thrilled to be joined by Trevor Liss, who is the co-founder and chief data engineer at FourZeroNine Solutions. He is someone who is far smarter than I am on all things automation. FourZeroNine is a solutions-based company specializing in key performance indicator dashboards, process automation, and software integration for small businesses. Welcome, Trevor. Thank you for joining us today. Do you want to do a quick introduction and give a little background on yourself?
Sure, 100%. Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. Good morning. And yeah, like she said, I am the chief data engineer at FourZeroNine Solutions. And basically what that means is that I come up with either custom software solutions or custom integrations that are able to connect different data sources to each other in order to either leverage automation or empower the data analytics that we do as a company at FourZeroNine.
And I will say that Trevor's joining us from Colorado today. So super extra thank you for coming to us at 7 a.m. your time. I'm very appreciative.
No problem at all. It's very exciting.
So we are going to kind of kick off with a poll just so we can understand where our audience is coming from with respect to automation. So Brittany, if you want to throw up that poll and we can see where everyone is. And the question for the poll is, do you currently use automation in your business today? Very simple one to start off the morning. Brittany, whenever you feel that we have a good amount. All right, pretty much down the line, Trevor. 60% yes, 40% no. I really didn't have expectations for that. I don't know if you did, but
Kind of what I would expect to see. Pretty 50-50. And I bet you that a lot of people that say no actually do still use some automations in their business. And it's just about thinking about what really is an automation.
So let's jump right in and do a little background and some level setting for the group, since we are pretty 50-50 of who is versus who isn't using automation. So I guess the overarching statement that I can make for this presentation and for automation overall that we're advocating for is it's not intended to replace team members. It's intended to automate repetitive, time-consuming tasks that will allow your team to have more balance in what they do and or make space for them to do higher level work. So we know that hiring has been challenging for industries across the board in this country. We're talking a lot about offshoring, specifically in the accounting profession. But I would just like to sort of make that statement that our intentions here to bring you knowledge and information about automation is not so that we can replace people, just so that we can level them up and have them do more meaningful, high value tasks as opposed to some of the basic automation. So that's my disclaimer. But Trevor, if we could start with some definitions, I would just love to hear you explain the basic definition of automation.
100%. So if I were to have to boil it down into one sentence, what I would say automation is the use of technology and software to perform repetitive tasks with minimal human intervention. So there's a kind of a lot packed in there. So let me unpack it a little bit.
Mm,
Automation comes in a ton of different forms. And a lot of businesses, like I alluded to earlier, already leverage automation in the capacity allowed by the softwares that they already use. So some things that might come top of mind to you are the way that you run payroll. I mean, a lot of people that are running payroll, they already have everything set up in their time system. They click it through a few buttons and bam, there comes out their payroll report. Another idea is the concept of email blasts. Again, you might not think of that as an automation, but anything where you're avoiding repeating the same task over and over again and using software to do so, that's an automation. And kind of the rule of thumb or the principle that I would say when I'm thinking about something that could be automated, when I speak to business owners, is that I tell them that if they or their employees are ever running the exact same task more than once, whether that's data entry, that's running reports, then that's a place where they have the opportunity to leverage automation in their workflows to really provide more value to their overall business. And that's the big why behind why we care about automation is any time that you're spent doing the same thing over and over again is time that could be spent with creative thought and providing more value if a computer could be taking care of that task for you.
mm. There's also something to be said for the value of doing the work, right? And the sense of value that you have as somebody performing those tasks is probably not really high. You're probably not particularly engaged within your organization. And that's just not a feel-good moment for anybody, for the team member, for the business owner. It's not going to be a good output if you're servicing clients or customers. That's going to come through in some aspect. So it's about having, a time-saving component for work-life balance, but it's also about having the value of feeling that you're truly contributing something meaningful. And I think that's what is so important when we skew very heavily towards technology and automation. We don't want to forget about the human aspect that's still very, very important within businesses.
100%. It's a bit of a level up for what you can do. If you can take all of these very basic or even what some might say mundane tasks and you're able to almost abstract them away from your business because you can have softwares that handle these items for you, it not only creates a smoother operation across the board, but it's a level up in the value that you and your employers are able to provide.
Right, exactly. So we're going to sort of break down some automations that we'll give examples of with both inside your organization that you can use and both outside your organization in a client customer facing way. So starting with automation inside the organization, internal processes, reports, things of that nature. For SKC, we use a lot of our management reports in dashboard form, and old reports that we used to run via Excel are now, automated through Power BI and dashboards. And so, Trevor, when your team was first going down this road to implement automations as part of its service offering, SKC was lucky enough to be the guinea pig, mostly because we were excited about it and we wanted to see how it would, provide value to us and save us time as an organization in making decisions. So I can certainly speak firsthand to the automations that we use to run our organization and the time that has saved us. I know that your team has created reports that we used to have a team member aggregate data from multiple different sources, put it into an Excel sheet every month, every week, depending on what it is, every quarter, email it out to the management team. We had one on a monthly basis. That's our billing report. So after we all as a firm do our billing, there were various different tabs of the Excel sheet that would be populated from different sources, sent out to the management team. We have a weekly flash report that professional service organizations besides SKC like a lot, that is an automation. And that is, the billable versus non-billable hours that our team members work each week compared to the same time frame last year. And then the other one that we've automated is our commissions payout. So it's integrated with our billing system. And we can sort of run it on a quarterly basis based on what has been billed, what's been collected, and send that out to our team members so they can approve of it and then, issue the commissions as appropriate. And these, were weekly, quarterly, monthly reports that required several different reports to be run from our practice management software by a team member in our office, again, put into an Excel, set out to the management team. Now these are run with, I think automatically it refreshes each week or each month that we need to see it, or we have the
Absolutely.
capability to go in and change the dates ourselves and run various different reports through Power BI. The weekly flash is sent automatically to the partner's inbox each week, so we can see those hour reports, right delivered. That in and of itself is an automation. And we chatted with our team members who were responsible for generating these reports, and we realized that it was saving between 6 and 10 hours a month. Now, if you map that out for a whole year, that's 72 to 120 hours a year, which equates roughly to 2 to 3 weeks per year of an individual's time that, again, they could either get back from a work-life balance perspective, or they can reallocate that time to do something that's more valuable to themselves to develop or to the company as a whole. So Trevor, I don't know if you have any sort of behind the scenes insight. I'm certainly sharing this from the user's end of it, but I know you guys worked on those automations for us. And I mean, it really just blew us away how well, they even look better as reports run through Power BI than what we were getting through Excel.
100%. And I think kind of the big behind the scenes insight here is just one of the foundational principles in my mind of automation, which is this concept of your data coming to you instead of you going to your data. And that's the design philosophy, I would say, that was behind all of those experiments that we did when we were learning how that we could implement automations in your business. Thank you for being our guinea pig, by the way, while we were figuring all of that out. And it's that concept that is so powerful because, like you said, we had this Excel spreadsheet and we knew that this already worked. But the first idea is, okay, how can we save time from the person who has to go create that report? Well, right now they have to go log into the system, they have to go find this exact report in the system, and then they need to reformat it to be the way that they're expecting the output to be. And that's the very first thing that we saw and identified as, oh, okay, we can automate that. There's no need for somebody to be doing the exact same basic transformations on an Excel file every single day. So that's where we started. And then the next question is, okay, well, what if we don't even want them to run the report anymore at all? And then we said, let's take a look at the software behind the scenes. How can we grab this data directly from the software so that nobody even needs to do anything in order for these numbers to populate? And that's when we started getting into the API, the behind the scenes of the systems that build up to create your management system. And we were able to pull all of those numbers directly. And from there, it's just a natural step to put them into Power BI so that they're very easy and on demand. And then the final part to complete that loop, so to say, is to set it up to email them to you. So we've gone from this situation where one person has to run a report, transform the information, validate it to make sure that it matches everything else, and then send out emails to nothing at all. You just open your computer and there it is right in front of you. And I think it's a very good example of not only the principle of your data coming to you, but also of the idea of kind of building up in little steps. The very first thing I want to do is save myself a little bit of time. Now I want to save somebody else a little bit of time. Now I want this entire thing to happen on its own so that I can always trust it 100% of the time. And it's that kind of building up is kind of how we've experimented with a lot of our own internal automations.
So I love that you use the phrase, your data comes to you instead of you going to your data, because
100%.
I think that's incredibly important. But because we're going to probably touch on this throughout the next hour, I just want you to explain to the audience what an API is, because you threw it in there as an explanation. And I just want to make sure that everybody's staying along with us as we kind of move through this.
Absolutely. And I'll give you the very simple definition of an API, which is anything that allows you to talk to another software. So whenever you're going into a software and you're automatically grabbing data through that, the API is the tool that allows you to do that. So all sorts of softwares have APIs. Your email inbox has an API. Everything these days that's on the internet has an API, and an API is just how you grab information from it. So it's very important when we're talking about automation because that's how we connect the dots, so to speak.
In my very simple accounting mind, I refer to it as a connector between two
Exactly.
pieces of software. So
100%.
all right, so we've covered internally running your organization, some automation of reporting and things that you see. Trevor, can you talk a little bit about the automation of emails within your organization?
100%. So I think that one simple thing, and it's not something that you might think of right away as an automation, but it's something that our clients and us internally have derived a lot of value from, is email reminders being automatic. And we touched on it in that last example with what we're doing with SKC. But many business owners know the idea of running their lives out of their inbox. I mean, you get in, you log on for the day, and you're just going through email after email after email, just trying to clear out your inbox. And again, it's that concept of your data coming to you. In a business day where you're super busy and you're just looking at things in your inbox, you want the critical things to show up where you're looking. So that's something that we kind of took that idea and ran with it. And we set up a ton of automated reminders, both for us and for some of our clients, to make it really, really easy for them to know the status of things without having to go find it. So it might be something as simple as a daily reminder to go check a report. And if you get that every single day, well, now you just got to click the link that shows up in your inbox. You don't have to remember to go out and look for it. And that's super, super simple. But we can get more complicated than that. We can get as complex as have something hooked up to our CRM system that takes a look every day, figures out anything that you as the partner need to maybe review or approve, and just shoots that right to your email inbox so that, again, you don't have to go check it and nothing is being held up because you're not able to get out of your inbox because it's right there in front of you. And that's kind of the idea we've had behind email automation and kind of the different spectrums of how you can use it.
And we've talked also about the report generation and how that just appears in your inbox, again, with your data coming to you instead of you going to your data when we talked about the management reports that we've automated at SKC.
Yeah, because it's great if you set up a bunch of reports that are going to help you identify, the KPIs, the key indicators in your business, as long as you look at them, as long as you check them, as long as you use them. And everybody's incredibly busy these days. So having it right there in front of you is just that next step to make your life a little bit easier.
Mm. So if you're lucky enough to be in an industry like we are in professional services, where our days are sort of counted down by 10-minute increments, and you're responsible for filling out timesheets, or anybody on your team is responsible for filling out timesheets, your team, Trevor, is actually doing something, or at least one of your team members is doing something really interesting with his timesheet and automation. Can you explain a little bit about what Mike's doing?
Oh, 100%. So this is something that and I actually do it now too, that we kind of came up with because putting in our time, we thought it was getting frustrating. And we're a bunch of automation experts, we're a bunch of data experts, and going through and spending 30 minutes to the 10-minute increment saying what we did throughout the entire week, it was something that we just thought, how can we make this easier on ourselves? And that's where our automation brain kicks in. And what we did is we hooked up our API again to our Outlook, and we were able to pull all of the stuff that we already had put down in our calendars. And then from some basic rules that we had set up in our calendars, we were able to automatically transform that into what the time card system expected. So without us having to do anything, every week our time cards get uploaded directly to the system so that all we have to do is maintain our calendar. And it's that idea of a one source of truth for us, which is a lot of times what we're trying to drive to with more complex automations, is finding one location that's the source of truth where you enter all of your information, and then everything else that you need to run your business just kind of comes right off of that. And while we're talking about it, there's one concept that came up while we were building out this automation that I think is very important if you as a business owner are thinking about what automations could I implement in my own business? And that's the principle of garbage in, garbage out. It's something we talk about a lot in data analytics and data automation, and I'll probably bring it up again. But it's this idea that the output that you're going to get out of an automation, out of a dashboard, out of anything that's using your data is only as good as the quality of the data that's going to be coming in. So for this specific example, when we were building this out, we realized that in order to make this automation work, we're going to have very specific tags on our calendar items that know what client was this work item for. Or was this associated with me setting up an automation or with validating something that's already been built? So when we can apply these very specific tags and be consistent about it, then we get an output that always looks consistent. So it's just an important thing to think about when you're thinking about what automations can I set up is my input data actually good enough to power what I want to create?
So you may be doing a little upfront investment time to get that process correct, right? In
Yep.
tagging certain things within your calendar. But in the long haul, that initial investment is really going to pay dividends because, well, first of all, entering time is time consuming in and of itself, but it's also an annoyance to have to do it. 20 plus years in public accounting, I can attest to that, as I'm sure anyone else on the call who's had to do a timesheet, certainly your team, Trevor, because you've developed a workaround for it. So, that upfront investment really will pay off dividends in the long haul from, again, time savings, but quality of life.
Exactly.
I do want to touch on how automation can assist in streamlining marketing and business development as well internally. So I know at SKC, we're working to automate our process of starting with proposals that go to clients, to our client setup sheets that get sort of input into our practice management software. And we've not yet perfected it. We're in the, I guess, beta testing stages of it. But we're more than halfway through that process. And so prior to how this automation will work, we were manually entering the information into our CRM about a prospect. And if we had to generate a proposal from that prospect, then someone would have to manually generate a proposal. And if that proposal was accepted, then there would be a manual, completion of a client setup sheet that would then have to be manually put into our practice management software. So right there, we've got 4 touches to the same data set, right? Which is probably making Trevor cringe right now. But we're all about getting that process down to entering the data only once and then automating the rest of the process through all of those various 4 touches that I talked about. So Trevor, I know that you really love this, because when we started talking about it and I went through, this is how it's done now, you truly did cringe and you're like, that's awful. Let's figure that out.
Yeah, so, and there's something really cool about this process, and it's a simple idea that can unlock a lot more automations. Because if you just think about that exact example that we gave at a high level of, okay, we have stuff in our CRM, it needs to first become a proposal, then it needs to become a client setup sheet, and then it needs to be entered into this entirely different system. That can kind of sound like a daunting task, because some of the items that are in the CRM don't translate directly to your proposal. I mean, your proposal isn't just a table of all of the fields of the information in your CRM. It's intelligent in a way. It needs to know what language needs to exist within the final product. And that's what I think was really, really cool about this automation, and why I was so excited to set it up, is that we're allowing for human decisions and interventions while minimizing the touch points, like you said, with the data. And the way that we do that for this specific example is with a very basic web application. And all a web application is it's a website where you can go and you can interact with your data, and it will provide you with the output. It's just a place for your automation to live, so to speak. So what we were able to do here is grab this information from the CRM, and the CRM knows, what's the value of this proposal, what work type is it, what's the length of the work, and then the basic stuff too. Who is this work for? What's their address? What's their name? And so the basic stuff we're able to fill into a template of a proposal with no problem. You replace name with name, you replace address with address, etc. But with those more complicated items, with what language should be on the proposal, oh, I know that if this is going to be, a quarterly accounting work, then I need to include this paragraph of language. Whereas if it's going to be, I don't know, a month, just this annual return, then instead I need to have this sort of language put in. And maybe because of the conversations that you as the partner had with the prospect, you need to add some custom language in at the bottom. But what's happening right now with us pulling all of this out and creating an email and sending it to our marketing person and then them turning it back around into a proposal, that's just not the most valuable use of our time. So instead, we pull out those questions of, oh, is there any more language that we need to add? Is this a quarterly project or is this an annual project? Into simple questions in our web app, you can answer some very, very quick yes or no questions, hit one button, 5 seconds later, you have your proposal with all the information that you need. And I just find that to be such a cool concept, because a lot of people shy away from automation because they're like, oh, that's too complicated, or I don't want to have to input all of that in the computer to begin with. And you can have these very simple on-demand, if this, then that type questions that can make it possible for these more complex automations to exist. And by the way, I didn't really close the loop on that whole project that we have. Once we create it into a proposal, that exact same data just keeps flowing all the way through into the management system. And again, we just have a system that maps the fields A to B, A to B, A to B, and then anything that doesn't match, we just ask the question to the user in real time. So it's able to just push everything right over, and it's one click of a button for you to get your final proposal.
So it's very much like what I had said with the investment in getting your calendar right to do the
Yep.
automation into your timesheet. This whole concept of automation is all about this upfront investment to get a bigger bang for your buck in the long term, right? Because we're going to do as many proposals as we're going to do every year, and however many years we continue to be, a firm and go into the future, and that automation is going to exist based on, the 2024 year that you guys have been building this out for us. And it is just going to be a repeatable automation that takes us into the future. And I think that when people worry about, well, what's the time commitment to do this? What's the dollar amount to do this? You really can't capture what the savings is into the future, both in dollars and times, to even do an ROI. And we have not done an ROI yet on this because it's not a complete automation yet for us. But there's going to be a very long runway where we're going to continue to use this automation. And I think that's what is important to drive home for people on automating things internally.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that there's one more point that I have there, that another value you get out of putting this investment, as you're saying, into automation is the chance to review your systems and processes and make things more efficient across the board. And that's something that we see a lot when we're setting up automations is, okay, great, we can do this right now with the way it is, but have you ever thought about maybe changing the way that you input these things here? Because without even doing anything else, if you're consistently putting in the contact information at this very first software, on this very first step, down the line, it's going to save you some time of having to go ask somebody, hey, where did that information even come from to begin with? And that, in my opinion, is the unspoken, undervalued part of automation for a lot of people is in understanding your systems and processes well enough to create an automation that's going to bring real value to your business, you more often than not end up creating more efficiencies anyways, just by getting things quote unquote prepped for automation. Again, that concept of garbage in and garbage out. If I need to have clean data at the beginning in order to empower a useful and valuable automation, that clean data is going to trickle down through the rest of my business and make everything in everybody's lives easier. And that's another value you get out of this whole investment period.
So as we close the conversation on internal automations within your organization, we're going to throw up a poll just to see if anybody's thoughts have changed through this. And we're kind of just going to take a quick pulse as to whether or not you're beginning to see automation, valuable automation as possibilities within your organization. So are you starting to see where you can benefit from this inside your organization? Maybe as we started this off, there was something that you didn't think was considered an automation or something that was even able to be automated. So just to get an idea of where everyone feels after that discussion on the internal processes. All right. Well done, Trevor.
100%.
Well done.
Everybody thinks so.
So let's switch gears and talk about automations for external of your organization. So outwardly facing deliverables to clients, to customers. Certainly we, as I said, we're the guinea pig for internal processes at SKC, but we've also used many automations to help service our clients. But I think that, Trevor, you have a very interesting example about the automation of forms and documents with a law firm. So I'd love for you to share that with the audience today.
Absolutely. And I do think that this is a great example. My kind of disclaimer going into talking about external automations or automations going to clients is that obviously we work in a vast variety of industries. So the output that you're looking at might not be the same or resonate with some of the outputs we're going to be talking about, but the concepts are the same. So while we're talking this through, kind of think in the back of your head, what parts of that might work for what I'm doing for my clients now? Where are my time savings going to be? So with that out of the way, I do want to talk about this law firm example that I have because I think it's very exciting and a very clear one-to-one addition of value through automation. So this law firm, like many, many law firms, has to prepare an absolute ton of documents. I mean, you have that basically is your output as a business if you're working in law, is you're creating these documents for people to sign so that they have these contracts, so that they have them down the line, and that's what they need from you. And a lot of these documents are something that these firms have a playbook for because it's almost the exact same thing every single time if you're setting up an estate. It's almost the exact same thing every single time. What is different are the little things, people's names, people's addresses, the relationships to other people that are being named in this document, what those people's names and addresses are. And all of this information is being captured by the law firm in a client interview that they do at the very beginning of their onboarding process, and it's put into this one system. And this one system has some documents that they're able to automatically generate, but it doesn't have the documents the way that this law firm wants them, with the exact specifications, with the logic, with the formatting. So what this automation was able to do is figure out the complex language that was needed to be put into the final document from a mixture of the basic information being put into the system and, like I talked about earlier with the proposal automation for SKC, basic logic trees, basic yes, no, if then that type questions being like, okay, is the is your option to have the will go to this person or have it go to this person? Do you want this to be kicked in right now? Do you want it to kick in down the line? Things that don't get asked during this client interview that the attorney working on the file knows off the top of their head. So now what the old process used to be is you go into the client interview, the document preparer goes in, creates all of the language, and then is, pinging the attorney who's doing the practice, being like, oh, what do I put for this part? What do I put for this part? What do I put for this part? And now the process is that the preparer doesn't even have to touch the document at all until it's already drafted, because the attorney just goes right in, clicks 3 buttons, selects which client that they're talking about, clicks download, and there's the document with all of the conditional logic that they want, with this paragraph included, this paragraph not included. And then the preparer can just go through, review it, make sure it's good to go, and send it right out. So this is so cool just because of the amount of time that it was able to save the end business. I mean, they were spending 2 to 3 hours a day on this type of document preparation, of copying and pasting names and addresses, of figuring out which paragraph do I need to delete from our template. And now none of that has to happen. It's all automated. And we had some cool features in there too. Like we were able to figure out the relationships between people dynamically so that it wouldn't say she or he at the right time. That's something that you might not think about with automation, but it's something that saves you a lot of time if you don't have to go back through and check it the whole way through. And then we had some more features of different users could get the different formats that they were used to seeing. So just based on who you logged in as when you went to go answer those questions, it would spit it out for you in the format that you like to see instead of the format that maybe your partner liked to see. So we had a lot of cool different features in there, but I just think it's such a highlight because we're saving hours a day and we're getting more consistent outputs and nobody's having to do the repeated copy paste work. And this is like a poster child almost in my mind of how you can really use automation to save time and upgrade the value of you and your employees' tasks and time.
And what's so interesting, Trevor, and funny that when we were preparing for this, we didn't actually touch on this aspect of it, but how we work with our clients, we read a lot of contracts, we read a lot of operating agreements, we make sure they have the wills and the power of attorneys and all of that. And inevitably, in going through, again, 20 plus years of this career, I've gotten a document for a client that has had a name other than my client's name in it, right? I mean, it just
Absolutely.
happens because if you're supposed to be replacing it in your template 5 times and somebody makes that mistake, it's not going to be right. And so I've seen that before. This automation eliminates that. It eliminates misspellings, as long as that
Because
initial
computers don't make
source,
mistakes. If you
as
give
long
them
as
good inputs, they give you consistent outputs.
right, as long as that initial data entry is accurate and correct, it's going to repeat itself and be consistent throughout the document. And I think that's something that not only are we saving time, but we have a much better potential of giving a better deliverable.
Exactly. I think that that's really the value that we're getting out of this. And that consistency leads to less review having to happen. Or all you have to do is that high level review and not the 6 copy paste and then review what you just did, where that's where these types of mistakes can happen. And these eliminations of these tiny things, they culminate in more value the more that you implement them.
Right, right. Now, internally for SKC, we've also worked with the 409 team on graph automation. So we have some clients that get their deliverable every month or every quarter is a graph, and they work with QBO. And we were having an internal SKC team member who was manually preparing the graphs, right? Taking the information that was in QBO, whether it was a calculation that needed to be done or just an input of a number out of QBO within Excel for the client every month. And 409 made this simple dashboard through Power BI that automatically delivers the graph. It saves the accountant time. It changing the report from being static and monthly. It's available whenever we want it because it's connected from QuickBooks through Power BI to the output that the client sees. Again, I've said this before, it's a much cleaner product than what the client is used to seeing when it's generated in Excel, just because I think Power BI has greater I'll call it prettiness capabilities, very technical term. So if that's something internally that we've worked on automating as a deliverable to our clients.
Yeah, and I think kind of two things that I want to highlight out of what you just said there. The first is another benefit of automation that we've talked about a little bit, but haven't really put the spotlight on, which is the instant availability, having information available at your fingertips. If you put the investment in to automate reports that you're having somebody prepare for you on a weekly or a monthly or a quarterly basis, well, now that they're automated, there's no reason why you can't look at it every single day because it's hooked up directly to where you'd be getting the numbers from anyway. And that's something that I think a lot of business owners have gotten value from because they might not have thought that they wanted that report on more than a monthly frequency, but now that they have it on more than a monthly frequency, they're looking at it every single day. And they're like, ooh, what's changed today? What can I do? How do I get these minor gains? Or how do I optimize things even farther? So that's the first thing. And then the second thing, and we'll touch on this a little bit more when we talk about how you as a business owner can get started with automation, but just because for this output, we put everything into Power BI and wrapped it into a dashboard for that so-called prettiness factor, doesn't mean that that's something that you have to do when you're just getting started with automation. Excel in of itself has a lot of fantastic capabilities that allow you to connect into data sources or create automations that we could still, if our output is going to be a graph that's going to be automated all the time, that's always going to show us the numbers, this is something that we can still do in Excel where you might be a little bit more comfortable and familiar as a starting point before you take the leap into Power BI or more reporting-based tool and software.
Hmm. So Trevor, before we leave sort of the outward facing automations that we've done for clients and that we use internally at SKC, do you have other examples that you'd like to share with the team today?
Absolutely. So one that comes top of mind for me is, and I guess I'll title it process monitoring. So this was a case study that we had with a client who they had a workflow where after the data got entered into the main system, a file needed to appear in a very specific folder inside of their overarching directory. And that file needed to be in a different folder based on what status that project was in. So a big part of their workflow is making sure that all of our documents are in the right folders all of the time, because that's how they did handoff. Then the next person who needs to work on a file, they just go look at their folder and then they know what they need to do. So it was critical for them at a management level that files were entering the right place and they were losing track of things and losing a lot of time or redoing work because things weren't getting moved properly. So what we implemented for them was this idea of process monitoring, where we had an automation that sat on top of their entire file system that kind of looked through everything and was always scanning and comparing where things were to what their statuses were in their primary system. And if anything was out of place, we had two options. We could either just move it for them and put it in where we thought the bucket should be, or notify whoever the responsible manager was that, hey, this isn't matching, this isn't validated, it's out of place. And then they were able to go in and make the correction. And they kind of liked it more the second way so that they had the control over where things ended up. But this is a slightly different automation because it's almost an automation for validation more than anything else. But that's another great use case for automation where you have a workflow that in theory should work, but has a lot of moving parts and a lot of steps. And if we can simplify some of those steps or take away one of the key things that needs to happen, not only is it easier across the board, but we're getting that kind of oversight of making sure everything is where it's supposed to be. Because like we just touched on earlier, if you give a computer a consistent input, it will give you a consistent output, and it can always be trusted in that sense.
I love that. The options are endless. And I know that every time you guys onboard a new client, we're always eager to see it on the SKC side because it's interesting to us and it amazes us every time of, well, what was this case scenario and how did you guys fix it? And what is it going to look like? And how much is it going to save? Like we're interested in all of that. And it's just so customizable to every client and their needs. And it's just really fun to watch what you guys can do. But what's next, right? And so, we've talked internally preparing for the sort of next phase of this, and it really is sort of bringing that software integration together as sort of that final step. And you explained that overall concept of what integration was as we were preparing for this. So Trevor, can you walk us through a little bit of the difference between automation and AI and we'll get into a little bit of the integration piece once we sort of do some defining of those two terms.
Absolutely. And like Sarah said, this was something that I was harping on when we were kind of preparing for this. And it's something that I am very passionate about, especially right now, because all of you can relate with the concept of having heard the word AI more times than you could possibly count in the last few months. I mean, it's absolutely the next big thing. Everybody's working on it. Everybody's talking about how can I leverage AI in my business? How can I use it to make my life easier? And I think that that's great, with a very large caveat that I think that a lot of people conflate automation and AI and or try to use AI for things that it might not be either ready for or its exact intended use case. So I wanted to be very clear on what the difference was between automation and AI. Automation is a computer performing repetitive tasks that's going to bring information from point A to point B. Again, the key concept, and I've said this a few times now, is if this, then that. We have something here, it's going over there. It is dependable and it is reliable. What AI is it's something that sits on top of your tech stack as a business, and it allows for content generation, whether that's summarization, whether that's inferencing, whether it's creating an email for you or trying to cross-check two things and tell you what's going on. And that's super valuable, but it is not dependable for the creation of consistent outputs. That's what automation is for. And when I was preparing for this, the idea that we kind of discussed was an automation is A to B. Very, very simple. We're going to do this and it's going to create that. Whereas AI is creating inferences from your data. It's saying, oh, let me look at everything and let me think about what's going on. Let me try to explain what's going on here. And while they're both super, super cool, because you can do some amazing things with AI, and I don't know if we're 100% there yet, if everybody's businesses like tech stacks are well enough developed for this to be an applicable use case. But something great you can do with AI is imagine just going to your computer and saying, hey, computer, why is my cash flow below what my budget should be? And your computer uses AI to go and take a look at your QuickBooks, take a look at your budget spreadsheet that you have sitting somewhere in your computer, pull everything together, take a look at all of your time cards and say, hey, these people didn't enter time 3 weeks ago on this day. And if they had entered time as you had expected in your budget, then your number would have looked like this instead of this. Imagine asking your computer that and it just spitting that right back out for you. That's what AI can do eventually. And that's what we need to look forward to. A lot of people's tech stacks aren't really there yet for them to be able to pull in all of the data sources required. So I think it's something super exciting for the future, but not necessarily right here, right now yet. What a lot of business owners really want is not AI, but simple automations where they can say, I just want to have this thing always create this output, and I want to know that it's the right output, and I want to be able to trust it, and I want it to just work. And that's what automation is good for. So when you're thinking about this and when the wheels are turning in your head for what can I automate in my business, or, oh, I keep hearing about AI, how do I use this? Just kind of keep that distinction separate of AI is for the generation or of new information or inferencing, whereas automation is for consistent, dependable outputs.
Hmm. And we've talked a lot about garbage in equals garbage out. So we really have to have, clean source data from where we're going to pull all of these things, whether it's, the automation, the integration as a starting point. And so talk a little bit for the audience of when we're doing things internally at SKC, the fields of data, and how when we're connecting something, let's just say through a client ID or a name, they have to match and be the same. Otherwise, that's going to cause problems with what we're trying to accomplish.
Exactly. And it's a big thing. It's a very easy kind of way that you, even if you're not remotely technical, can decide, okay, is this something where automation is even possible? Is I keep saying thing A and thing B. We want thing A and thing B to talk to each other, whatever they are, whether they're your CRM and your management system, whether they're your accounting system and your task tracker. You want them to be able to talk to each other because that's how we save time. But these things can only talk to each other if they're agreeing on what the items are that they're talking about. So let's use this example of a CRM into a practice management system. Two different softwares that a lot of different businesses have. If we want to only ever touch the data once, to only ever do entry when we create the lead over in the CRM, then there needs to be a consistent mapping of these fields from the CRM to the practice management system so that it can push its way right across. So for this example, a really good one would be client ID, but maybe your client ID doesn't populate in your CRM system and it only exists in your practice management system. Well, then we have to maybe think about, okay, these client names need to be consistent across our softwares. And if we want to implement an automation that's going to expect information from both of these data sources, then we might have to go do some cleaning to make sure that these names are on the exact same thing perfectly on both sides of the software so we can make that mesh and make that connection. That's just one example, and that might seem fairly obvious, but as we get a little bit more complicated, back to my example of talking about having your task system hook up into your accounting software. Well, first of all, I made that up off the spot. So let's think about a reason why we want these two things to be talking to each other. Let's say that you want to automatically generate a task for somebody at the end of a month based on information that's coming out of a report. So you say, okay, if we're under budget by X amount, then I want to create a task for the person who's looking at our books to figure out why, sum it up, and send it out to me. Let's just say that that's the use case for our automation. Well, now we need to make sure that these two things can talk to each other. So we need to make sure that your task system agrees with your accounting system on who the responsible person is, on is the name on this time card the same as the name that we're going to assign the person to in this task. Again, whenever these are very specific examples, but whenever we're thinking about creating an automation, it's very important that you think about, okay, what's my data in my first source? What's my data in my second source? And what's that connecting field going to be? What's that piece of information that is consistent across the two of them so that they can talk? Even if you don't know how to make them talk, that's something that maybe that's where we as 409 step in, but you can figure out how to have them talk by knowing that they have fields that are going to be aligned.
So you have a really great example of an existing client that you've worked with where you did an integration between Shopify and the QuickBooks data, and you created an automation related to inventory. Can you walk us through a little bit about that example?
Absolutely. I'm going to step back real quick first to say what the difference is between automation and integration, because that's also two kind of buzzwords that can get people confused sometimes. All an integration it's a type of automation. And an integration is when we're connecting two data sources directly without there being any sort of human output. So a great example would be what I talked about before with the CRM going into the practice management software. We can integrate these two systems so that you never have to create the client again in the practice management system because it is already in there. Because you put it in as a lead, and that lead system integrates with your practice management system, so it's already there. That's an integration. Nobody's touching it at all. There's nobody looking at it. It's just the connection of two data sources. So with that being said, this case study, and again, I think this is a very interesting one, was an example of a custom integration. So this was a company that they had a storefront and they had their books. And their storefront was what they wanted to be their source of truth. And I mentioned that once earlier. That's an idea with automation, is we want to only have one software that we're touching, that we're bringing information in and out of, and that's our source of truth. So they had their storefront that they wanted to be the source of truth. And then they have their QuickBooks where they need to be right so that they can run all of their reports and that they can understand what their margin is, what their profit is, etc. The current system that they had was this very basic bridge that anytime that anybody bought anything on their storefront, it would create an invoice in their accounting system. Now that is all well and good if you have the most simple business use case. But as soon as they started doing anything more complex, where they were like, okay, well, we're going to take an invoice now for 1,000 orders from a big company, and then they can pick and choose whatever they want and send it out, completely breaks the connection because now we're realizing revenue before we've ever actually done anything. And the books start getting messier and messier and messier until they had thrown their hands up and they're like, we can't make these two things talk to each other. We don't know how to do it. And that was the point where we came in, we stepped in, and we created a custom integration between these two systems. So now, with no one touching anything at all, all of their complex order types, whether it's taking an invoice ahead of time or shipping out the order before we take in the invoice, or just a standard creating of an order, or we have something on consignment that we don't actually want to recognize. All these little nuances that were breaking their connection before, we've now accounted for in this custom integration that pushes everything directly in the QuickBooks so that everything is being realized as it should be realized. Things are coming in at the right time. They're going into the right account buckets, and the numbers for the first time are becoming clean. And for the first time in a year, they're able to look at their books and actually have an understanding of what's going on without sending somebody to go do 5 or 6 hours of Excel math with 7 other spreadsheets that they've been maintaining to kind of barely limp through having this connection together. We've eliminated all of these auxiliary spreadsheets. We've eliminated the need for somebody to go in and do a bunch of really hard math just to figure out what our bottom line numbers are for the month. And that's this idea of everything now just works. So we talked a lot about this concept of putting that there's upfront investment involved in automation, but that's where you get the value from, is you have a system that isn't working, that you're leaking time to, you're losing time every time that you need to use it. And if you get a good automation in place, you never have to touch it again. You can just know that it's going to work. And so the time savings start coming left and right once you're able to get something like this working. But yeah, that's an example of an integration, not an automation, because we're just having the two data sources talking to each other with no other output.
I think it's important to highlight this because we've gone through some really great examples in real world situations where you guys are implementing these automations, but you're not doing it for billion-dollar companies. You're not really doing it even for $100 million companies. Like, you're doing it for clients, and you would know this better than I do, but I'm going to roughly say, as low as $1 million in revenue up to maybe 20, 30 million in revenue probably is really the sweet spot that you're working in. So truly small, medium-sized businesses that can benefit from these automations, these integrations, without having to, go through this huge investment with a giant consulting company. And it's really amazing for us to have this capability because we're so passionate about serving that entrepreneur business owner who's typically in that revenue range for us, at SKC. And so I think, without question, there's a business case, regardless of the size of your entity, behind automation, with time savings, increased efficiency, increased engagement and job satisfaction from your team, which all ultimately leads to growth and profitability for your organization. So Trevor, this might be a really obvious question, but is it safe to say that there's always something in your business to be automated?
Absolutely. If you haven't thought, if you can't think of something, keep thinking about it, because you will think of something that can be automated in your business. Maybe it's a really small thing and it's only saving you a little bit of time, but that's where you can start getting that mindset of having my data work for me instead of me working for my data.
As a user, I can say it becomes addicting too.
Exactly.
So where would a business owner start? Let's say, you've got some head nods, some eyebrow raises over this last hour. What is a business owner's next step? What are the low-hanging fruit that they can start to go after?
Yeah, and you've heard me say the same thing time and time again. We're connecting thing A with thing B. So first step is identifying what thing A and thing B are actually going to be in your business. Almost all businesses use more than one software platform in order to execute their operations. So the very first question you have to ask yourself is, are those things already talking to each other? Because if they're not, there you go. That's your very first start for automation. So anything that's for internal, any deliverable for internal consumption generally has to do with that. So if we're creating a report that's like, hey, what's in here? What's in here? Is everything reconciled? That's a very common example of something that you can start with trying to automate. Try to remove that from having to be a thing. Try to connect these two things directly and see if that's saving you time. Or if you're having an internal deliverable, so let's say that you're creating, like we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, these weekly or monthly reports that are for partners to look at to understand what's happening in their business. Let's start with trying to automate those, because we have the time to experiment and we have the ability to kind of tweak it to however we like, because it's all of our own internal resources and information. So that's one place I'd say you could start looking, a direction you could head if you're looking for what this easiest stuff to automate is. The other direction I would say is just go to look for anything repetitive. right? Either look at your own workflow or start talking to your employees about what their workflow is and be like, okay, what's the thing that you're doing over and over again? What's the thing that you hate doing that you have to always do because you got to always type the numbers in because we have to? That's where we want to start with automation, whether it's going to be putting your time in over and over again, figuring out what all of the, like sending out an update reminder to like 7 different people on 6 different days as an event is nearing. And oh my God, it's driving me crazy because I always have to be figuring out this information. That's a really, really easy thing to automate. And that's something that with no technical experience and without really talking to anybody who's a developer, you can figure out how to automate on your own using plenty of freely available resources.
And that's what we did internally. We talked to the boots on the ground team and said exactly that. What do you hate doing? What is a repetitive task? What do you feel should be easier in this day and age? And that's really how we started creating our wish list of automations. So Trevor, we had a couple of pre-submitted questions with the registration, and one of them is, what are your thoughts on setting up basic dashboards and KPIs in QuickBooks Online?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a great place to get started. If you just want to, that idea of having your data coming to you, you want to get started simple and easy without having to leave the confines of the softwares that you're comfortable with. I think setting up some basic reports on QuickBooks Online, figuring out what your top level indicators are and KPIs, and getting them to show front and center as soon as you boot up your QuickBooks is a super valuable place to get started. And then from there, that's where you kind of, like we said, it becomes addictive to want to try to start trying to automate things. That's where you might be like, man, well, I wish I could see the information directly from the source of my management system because I wish I could have it split out by case that we're working on or by a client. And I don't have it like that in my books. And now all of a sudden you've got the bug and now you're going to want a dashboard. But I think that it's a really great place to get started because you can just go into QuickBooks, go into the reports, and start messing with those tools there. And you're going to start getting a feel for what the principles are behind everything and how we can kind of figure out, okay, well, do we care about our profit? Is that something that I can pull easily? Is that something that I can split out by our clients? Or is that not something that we have the capability for in our books? How could I get that capability? What are my next steps? That's where you can kind of get the feeling for it and get started. I think it's a great entry point.
And the thing about that too is that, Trevor, is one dimensional, right?
Yeah,
Because we're pulling from the data source that is QuickBooks Online in this question, in this example.
into
And
the same
so
data source.
you're missing other inputs and other factors that really can level up your decision making as a business owner. But I do agree with you. I think it's a great place to start and see things that will, jump off the page or off the screen at you that you may not look at, just using QuickBooks Online as sort of your checkbook, if you will.
Absolutely.
And then another pre-submitted question is, how do you get to a point where you understand whether you need a simple or a complex tool to improve efficiency? So when would you use Excel versus investing in a more robust CRM system?
And my answer would be keep it simple. I think that the goal is to get the most value out of the smallest amount of investment until you feel like you can justify that larger amount of investment. So if you're first starting and you're keeping track of things in Excel, the flip over switch for me would be, okay, when is my time more about copying and pasting and making sure this is right than it actually is about using what this is that I'm maintaining? As soon as we're spending more time creating the product than we are using it, that's where we need to step up to a higher level system. And also, features matter too, because if we're keeping everything local, it's very hard for us to connect that into other things. It's hard to keep everything talking to each other when something's sitting statically on your computer. When you go to that next level and you start using cloud softwares, using a cloud CRM, let's say, well, all of a sudden we're now investing in Salesforce, we're investing in Monday or something similar that you may have heard of. You get the value of it not only being available everywhere, because now it's on your phone, it's on your computer, wherever you want to go, but that thing has more ability to talk to other softwares than whatever you had built on the ground. So again, I'd say that rule of thumb is if you're spending more time working on it than you are using it, it's time to maybe take that next step. But it's identifying those abilities, those shortcuts to save time that's really important when we're talking about automation.
That's great advice. And I'm going to ask for Grace to go just a few moments over our typical top of the hour, because I do want you to answer this last question, Trevor. And And that's really your opinion on what user-friendly tools are out there for business owners to help them move in a direction towards, automation, aside from maybe calling you and the team at 409 Solutions. Obviously, there's a lot of sort of out of the box available options out there. What are your thoughts on something that a business owner can start playing around with on their own?
And absolutely, and it can get very scary if you just start Googling things because all of a sudden you're looking at code and it's just too scary and you don't even know where to start. So here are two tools that require no code that are drag and drop solutions that I think are really great if you want to get started. The first is Power Automate. It's a Microsoft product. You can just Google Power Automate and it'll show up in your Microsoft environment. And it has built-in connectors for everything and anything related to Office. So if you want to, from your Excel sheet that you're already tracking, send out daily reminder emails to the people that are impacted by something, that's something Power Automate can do. Loop through those rows and spit out emails to the right people. If you want to take a look at items that are in your SharePoint and send out emails based on that, or the vice versa, if you want to receive consistent emails from a client or from your software and file them into a SharePoint list or create a OneDrive file from it, that's something Power Automate can do. Any interaction or connection between Microsoft products, I couldn't recommend Power Automate more. It's where we got started with automation. It's where SKC got started with automation. You don't need to know much to get started. There's a ton of resources online for it. So if you're interested in this and you use Microsoft, I'd say get started with Power Automate. The other one I'd say is Zapier, Zapier, in case you want to look that up later. It's a very similar tool to Power Automate, except that it's not Microsoft focused. It's its own standalone experience. It has hundreds of built-in connectors for a lot of really, really common CRMs that I might have touched on earlier. There's a Salesforce one. I'm pretty sure there's a Monday one now. For a lot of different management systems, they have connectors in for them. And it allows you to, with no code and not having to talk to anybody else, start doing that, grabbing information from A and putting it into B, creating these transformations, pulling things out, creating documents, sending out emails, all without having to do any code, just by dragging boxes, filling out fields, and connecting them with lines. It's really intuitive, really easy, and again, there's so many resources available online for it. If you want to get more complicated than that, if you have a developer in-house or you know somebody who is a developer, is experienced with code, the tools that we've used internally to kind of, like Sarah said, bring these automations to people who aren't necessarily using enterprise-grade solutions or having ridiculously expensive consultations. The tools that we use are things like Fast API. There's another tool called Flask. Again, these won't mean anything to you if you have no computer science background, but bring them to somebody you know who does. They're very simple little tools that allow you to spin up APIs that you can create your own custom automations and shove them in the cloud with very, very little work. And that's kind of our easiest base level solution when we're trying to create APIs for people. And kind of my final parting thing that I would say here, because I know that we are a couple minutes over on time now, is that when the wheels are spinning in your head and you're thinking about automations and you're not sure whether this is something you can do on your own or if this is something that's too complicated for your use case, a phone call is free. So please feel free to reach out to me. Just ask me just let me know what you're thinking, and I'll be sure to let you know what direction you can kind of go to get started with it. Brittany, I don't know if you could shoot my email in the chat just for anybody to copy if they wanted it, but please do feel free to reach out. I love talking about automation if you haven't been able to figure that out from the past hour, and I'd love to be able to help anybody who needs it.
As you can tell, Trevor is incredibly passionate about this and would be more than willing to have conversations about it with anyone that wants to reach out. So, Trevor, thank you so much for joining us this morning at the very early hour, starting at 7 a.m. your time. You shed light on this topic for us, and you're bringing complex tech ideas to our small business owners, and that's just so valuable to the team and to all of us. So I appreciate you joining us today. I want to thank the audience for joining us today. Please let us know if there's future topics on the office hours that you would like to hear. We want to make this as meaningful as possible to you. I wish everybody a happy, healthy, and safe weekend, and enjoy the rest of your Friday. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.